Hey everyone, we got another series compilation, this one being the complete one-tip series for every main, sub, and special in the game. This took a while to complete, but it was a lot of fun. Enjoy the compilation. Specials are the most crucial element of Splatoon 3, and with 15 of them, we have the most in the series. So today I want to give you one tip for using and countering every special in the game. I'll be going in order of the special roles. If you haven't seen my video on that and want to see more information about specials, I'd highly recommend checking it out. And be sure to subscribe if you want to see more. Let's get started. Against Zipcaster, even if you're a more mobile weapon, the safest play is to move around constantly to avoid not dying, and especially going near teammates. Setting up 2v1 situations can make it really easy to kill the Zipcaster user, and at the very least keep yourself from getting killed. A lot of players don't utilize Zipcaster's actual damage ability. It can combo quite well with many of the weapons in it, especially the Splatoon Stamper, and even can go through certain objects like the Ink Vacuum, making it reliable as a way to kill that weapon. Against Inkjet, keep in mind its movement speed is very low, and the hitbox of the person using it is actually slightly larger than normal. This means for many weapons with bigger hitboxes such as blasters or sloshers, and long distance weapons like spalings and chargers can easily kill the weapon from a safe distance, so those should be the players who has a priority of focusing it, unless of course it gets really close to something like a shooter. For those using Inkjet though, you can use your squid form in the middle of the special, which not enough people take advantage of. This gives you added mobility and makes you much harder to hit. It's really useful to use. Even dipping in a squid form for just a little bit to descend slightly in the air can mix up your positioning a bit when people are fighting you. Against Reef Slider, this weapon has a lot of end lag, and unlike a Splatoon 2 baller, there are no invincibility frames after. This means bombs, AoE shots, or even just shooting it normally afterward is reliable damage that gives you a huge advantage when punishing it. This is also why, if you're using Reef Slider, my tip is not to always just explode right next to a group of enemies, as most of the time it leaves you killed. Take advantage of the invincibility and distance to go far behind the backlines and split team fights, especially if you're a Tetradooley. Splatoon 1 veterans are very familiar with this, but Trizuka has a very distinct sound, and when you hear it, it's time to get into cover immediately. The weapon has a fair bit of startup, and that sound is basically your warning signal to move, because if you're out in the open, you are probably the target of this special. I honestly have two tips I'm really close with for Trizuka, and they're both simple, so I'm just going to cover both of them. First of all, the special actually does really good damage to objects and is multiple shots. This means for something like a crab tank, you can hit it with a minor amount of damage, and then use the 3 shots to both break the special and kill the user. This can also work on a slightly weakened Big Bubbler, for example. My other tip is that the arc of Trizuka is actually incredibly useful. There are some reliable spots on certain maps, such as the right side of Mincemeat and the left side of Sturgeon Shipyard, where you can reliably arc and hit cover spots under walls. These take time to get used to, but they are worth learning, especially with how commonly people are going to be sitting there. Crab Tank's main weakness is its speed, both in its ball form, standard fire mode, and the standard fire firing itself, which has a limited turning speed. This means if you have something that can break it at a safe distance like a charger, or special weapon like a Booyah Bomb or Triple Ink Strike, you can reliably hit it from that distance and break the special. Also, I've heard some people don't actually know about this, but sticking out of the crab is not just a visual thing. They are vulnerable up there, and especially if you're behind them, could be really reliable to get a shot. This is a hard tip to word, but when using the secondary fire mode, you can use regular firing mode in between it without sacrificing the fire rate. This also has a really cool one-shot combo if you hit it direct with the secondary fire. When fighting Stamp, keep in mind it does not fully protect it. It's especially vulnerable at the sides, and even the front-facing mode does not block shots entirely, especially if you aim lower at the player's feet. When using the special, take advantage of the jump swing to get your rush mode started. Compared to the normal way to start it, it's much faster and less predictable, and you can also use the swing to hit a different direction and then rush on the opposite side. Moving on to the support specials, the most effective way to get rid of Big Bubbler is to prevent it from being used in a relevant location in the first place. If you can keep something like a junior away from the zone and they have to put their bubble somewhere in a corner, you can just fight them where the bubble isn't and ignore the special completely. And on top of that, without breaking the special, it lasts for a whole 15 seconds before they can charge their next one. For using Big Bubble, you can probably infer that putting it in the most relevant and hard to ignore locations is the best thing for it, but since that's obvious, keep in mind that the beacon inside the bubble can be used as a mini meat shield for anyone who gets inside it. The most important thing to keep in mind about Vacuum is once it's fully charged, or when the duration runs out and you switch to the shot mode, you cannot squid form or do any other actions, meaning if you're able to shoot them there, you can kill them even before the shot comes out and effectively punish the special. For those using the Ink Vacuum, stop popping it on your snipe! You have a splatter shot desperately trying to run in mid on these terrible maps, and you're just panicking and sitting on the plat for 6 seconds only to fire a shot that hits nobody. Move! Ink Vacuum doesn't do much on its own. It is mainly made
to protect teammates, especially through hard-to-move areas of the map, so use it in conjunction with them so they can be invincible and walk forward, forcing the enemies to also shoot, fill up your vacuum, and give you a more powerful shot. Honestly, there's not too much of a difference of fighting tacticooler players than normally, but the one thing I can say is the arrows that you have from it are actually something that can be seen a bit more easily and can prevent hiding in ink or sharking, so take advantage of that when fighting a team grabbing the tacticooler. For using this special, it's worth noting that the timer of the buffs only starts once you grab the drink, so sometimes you can wait to grab them a little bit later and have them last a bit later during your push, depending on the situation. Wavebreaker is pretty low HP at only 400 points, so if you have a bomb or weapon that can reach it safely, don't be afraid to try to damage and break it, especially when it's out in the open. For using Wavebreaker, my general rule of thumb is about half of the wave should be hitting an area you already control, but the other half should be contesting space the enemy has. Doing this along with placing it in small amounts of cover lead to way more effective wave breakers. Finally, it's time to cover the displacement specials. My tip against Booyah Bomb isn't even going to be about the special itself, but the teammates. If someone booyahs for your Booyah Bomb, that does actually give away their position, which can be really useful for you looking to get a quick kill. The biggest mistake I see from people popping Booyah Bomb is using it too much like a panic button. It does up armor to help keep yourself alive, but that won't work against multiple people or even specific weapons. This special is mainly to give you a vantage point to see where to move in, and a displacement tool to move people who can get in the way of where you want to go. Against Inkstorm, keep in mind that the damage it has is incredibly low. While it does last a long time, if you're in a really far away position where you can't get chipped, you can often stay in the storm and fight a little bit before forcing yourself to move. When using Storm, you want to get the most out of that long duration. Don't just throw it at someone to where the second half of the storm is already going to be past it. Throw it at a location where it'll affect it for the entire 8 seconds as it travels, such as starting on the Hagglefish Splat Zone and moving behind it afterward to displace enemies. So Morsa made a super good video on this already and was the first person to really publicize it, but it's still worth noting, as a lot of people aren't aware of it, that Killer Whale just follows how you move. Don't dash all the way across the stage, because then the lasers following you are going to hurt your enemies. Do smaller movements, and you can even stay on things like the tower while an ink vac goes off. To get value out of Killer Whale, you need to actually put pressure on the people the special is targeting. Just launching them across the map is not enough. Have another special, a teammate, or yourself apply pressure to them so they have to focus on fighting you while dodging the lasers. Against Tri-Strike, keep in mind that they can't use their main, sub, or even swim form when throwing them. Putting a little bit of pressure will force them to try to throw all 3 Tri-Strikes, potentially using some for themselves just to stay alive. Tri-Strikes only go off once they hit the ground. By abusing different arcs, you can have them explode simultaneously to create much more pressure. Honestly, Tentamissile's main job is to force people to move, and there's not a lot you can do about it, but you can control where the missiles land, so do be careful you don't put them in a spot like, well, you know, the Splat Zone. Please keep them off the Splat Zone. This also includes trying not to put them directly behind your teammate who's trying to run away from their own pair. For missiles, keep in mind if you launch on 2 targets, it's 5 missiles each, and on 1 target, it's 10 missiles. This is mainly useful if you really need to clear a specific person off of something like the tower, or try to break a special like the Big Bubbler or the Rainmaker Shield.
A little over a year ago, I covered a tip for and against every special in the game, and now we have 4 new ones. So I'm gonna remake the video, and for all the specials I've already covered, I'll try my best to find different tips than I gave last time. I'm hoping you guys are gonna enjoy this, and more guide content coming soon. But without any further ado, subscribe if you enjoy, and let's get right into it. Let's start with the brand new specials. First up, Kraken. The most important thing to keep in mind when using the special is not to tunnel one target too hard. Your swim speed basically matches that of a normal player with no gear abilities, which, given their better mobility, means they're probably going to evade you. Switching between them makes it harder for them to trade their value by having just one person run from you, and makes it easier to scatter more people. If you're going against Kraken, the main counterplay is knowing when it needs your attention. There is no point in trying to help tame a special that is immune to knockback. Your goal instead is to keep the other players away. Basically, if Kraken's on you, keep it off your team. If it's on someone on your team, keep the enemy team off of them. Next up is Super Chump. Unlike most of the other entry specials in the game, this does not directly influence the enemy position, and while it technically can be lethal, that itself is pretty rare. Instead, this special provides value by blocking damage and painting instantly upon their landing, not moving people. You want to use this as an advantage and pick spots where you want to fight. Because of that, if you're on the enemy team, you don't want to try to just break all the chumps, but only break the ones that are necessary and try to fight as much as possible where the special isn't landing. For the new splatter color
color screen, keep in mind that it also blocks your own team's vision. Sometimes this means you might want to use it sideways to block off line of sight from one side, or wait until you're closer to mid to use the special. Be especially careful not to block long-range weapons line of sight, such as special weapons like Crab Tank or Chargers. As a bonus, you can also see people sharking if they're hit by the screen. When going against the special, pre-firing and any form of location tools, mainly point sensor, are both very nice, but most importantly, the screen blocks their team too. So if you use a sharking weapon like a roller, you can use it as cover for yourself and look for people on the other team trying to step through it. For triple splashdown, you actually don't want to super jump that much, as the radius for super jump splashdowns is much smaller than it was in Splatoon 2, making it much more situational. Instead, it's actually best to use it normally, especially using the fist to help cut off people or make it so that those shooting at you go down with you. While against the special, keep in mind it is slower than Splatoon 2 and is easier to shoot down. It's always the same amount of height, so learn that as it's very crucial. The main thing that you need to add on compared to Splatoon 2 though is being able to move out of the way. Be careful especially not to walk into the areas where multiple hitboxes overlap. That's where it's the most deadly, and in fact you can even parry the outside 60 damage hit if you can't go as far. Counterplay to this special is not just shooting it down, but deciding if you can, doing that, and then making sure you can move far away enough to not be traded out. When using Zipcaster, it's really important not to tunnel one target. Like with Kraken, it's really good at switching between multiple people, except even more so here given how fast you are. So if you're diving someone who's running away from you and you're not going to be able to catch up to them as easily, don't be afraid to switch to someone else who's expecting you to be on the charger and is not going to be ready when you one-shot them. When going against the special, keep in mind the arm line shows where it's going to end up, making punishing the lag much more easy. 9 times out of 10, you're not trying to shoot it as it goes to the location, look where it's going to end up and be ready to punish it there, especially if you have anything with a one-shot. For Inkjet, it got a boost buff a while back, which is an insanely useful dodge tool to keep in mind, especially if you're going against shorter range options, so be sure to have that ready when going for things like sloshers, for example. Against Inkjet, keep in mind grades are one of the best places to survive the special, and if you don't have that, it's really worth learning the time to parry it. Squid Roll against it is very reliable, good at surviving, and tanking shots isn't as hard as it looks, at least to get a few of them. As for Reef Slider, the special recently got a startup lag buff, making it actually the fastest panic option in the game, though unlike all of the others, it doesn't move slightly while you're using it. This means depending on your situation and weapon, if you have something really aggressive like Tetra anyway, using it as a tool to stay alive and either get far away as possible or explode and try to trade someone out is actually kind of a good idea. Against the special, even though it got invincibility since the last time we covered it, its end lag is still awful, and you can still easily punish it, especially if you have bombs or a high damage attack in a single hit, like a charger or even something like a Splatana Charge Slash. For Trizuka, pop this special with the target in mind, and once they're gone and you don't have anyone to shoot at, use the rest of your shots and move. This special can start and end quickly, making gameplay a lot more fluid. Against it, keep in mind that you can heal a lot faster since its damage got nerfed from 60 to 53 to be able to tank an extra shot. So when you're getting spammed by area of effect, look for opportunities to heal quickly. For Crab Tank, keep in mind to use this special in a good spot. You have a slow movement speed and a long duration, which means a bad crab can often be ignored and loses you a lot of time. If you do have to move with it though, keep in mind that moving forward and backward is slower than using side to side, so diagonal movement, just like actual crabs. When you're going against it though, keep in mind since its end lag nerfs, ball form is super laggy and slow and loses a lot of value. So if you have any weapon that has an easy time getting it to go into ball form, such as area of effect weapons, it is 100% worth trying. For Ultra Stamp, keep in mind that you are much more effective against a target that's not a shooter, dually, or splatling, since they have a much harder time shooting through it and you want to prioritize those weapons. When you're going against it, the duration is even lower than it used to be, so wait it out or let it get greedy. If you are fighting it, remember aiming lower is the easier way to hit through it. For Big Bubbler, when using the special, look for spots you can hide the weak point. For example, on Hagglefish zones, you can use this little tower thing to be able to block it, making it tank for a lot longer. Admittedly, for this special, I will reuse the counterplay I gave in the original video. Really, the most major thing by far is making the special be used farther away. Keep track of where bubble players are and don't let them sneak into key areas. Next on the support list, Ink Vacuum. Keep in mind this special now has the ability to cheese the Rainmaker pop, or if it has a little bit of charge, quite a lot of zones. Learn different lineup spots from safe positions and where to shoot. Because of this, if you're on the enemy team, be really careful not to fill Ink Vac in these situations. Sometimes I'll see people panic, shoot an Ink Vac that's not really doing anything anyway, and then all of a sudden a shot flies across the map and caps the zone. For Tacticooler users, keep in mind if the stand breaks early, the cooldown for the special, normally 10 seconds, gets cancelled. This is most relevant when using the tower to block it, but other things like the bluefin zone or spinners can also work. Just make sure your team is nearby enough to grab it first. When going against Cooler, keep in mind pretty much everyone on the other team is going to go heal
here to grab it. If you're a sharking weapon that can stay close, you can wait for that. Or if you're an area of effect weapon or something with a bomb, you can spam damage nearby to try to get people away from it. For Wave Breaker, the object itself can tank a little bit, and given how weak the special is right now, it might be worth it sometimes to put it somewhere mid-fight where it can actually block a little bit of damage to position saver. Just don't get too greedy with it. Use it to block off an angle, not sit in mid where an object shredder E-liter will instantly delete it. If you're going against Wave Breaker, keep in mind you don't always need to shoot it down. The waves itself don't require much work to avoid depending on the position it's in, so make sure it's worth your time or leave it to higher DPS weapons like Splatoon Stamper to take care of it. Though of course, if you have a weapon like Tetra that has to stay grounded on the floor to do anything, you should definitely prioritize it more. For Booyah Bomb, one of the most important things is to use it as continuation. Say I'm S-Blast and get a kill on one side of the map. I can then pop Booyah Bomb to prevent me from getting dived and traded out, then throw the Booyah Bomb to keep my push and streak going. It's a great way to turn a small amount of kills or momentum into a lot of momentum, leading to much larger pushes. Against the special, keep in mind there are a lot more things that shred it than it used to, such as Trizuka or Tri-Strike for instance. If you have one of these keep specials, keep an eye on a Booyah user when they're close to it and where they're going to use it for a potentially free kill. As for Inkstorm, there is so little to say about the special, I'm just going to reuse the old one. Against Inkstorm, keep in mind that the damage it has is incredibly low. While it does last a long time, if you're in a really far away position where you can't get chipped, you can often stay in the storm and fight a little bit before forcing yourself to move. When using Storm, you want to get the most out of that long duration. Don't just throw it at someone to where the second half of the storm is already going to be past it. Throw it at a location where it'll affect it for the entire 8 seconds as it travels, such as starting on the Hagglefish Splat Zone and moving behind it afterward to displace enemies. For Killer Whale 5.1, try to mark at least 2 people when you use it, as it's usually when the whales on one person are hitting another that a displacement becomes annoying. When going against it, keep in mind not to super jump unless if you have something like Cooler, because with the higher damage, it will melt you before you can leave, and that is a big strength of the special. For Tri-Strike, keep in mind the high special damage per second, and not to use it just for paint, but use it to deal with many of these specials if the other team is running them. For the counterplay with this one, again, I'll say the same thing as last time because it's by far the most important. It is still vulnerable when you use it. I especially want to emphasize using bombs against it. It is incredibly useful given the fact that they cannot move. Finally, with Tenna missiles, you can't spam these anymore like you could a year ago due to the 10-second cooldown. And with a smaller outside radius, you want to instead make sure you use this to reveal enemies and fight with your own missiles, regardless of the weapon you're playing. Against missiles, you can hear where they're popped. Try to spread out a little bit so they don't clump up too much, and especially don't put them on the objectives.
Sub-weapons are often overlooked, and they're way more important, especially in Splatoon 3, than you might think. So today I want to give you one tip for and against every single sub-weapon in the game. If these tips help you, be sure to subscribe to see more Splatoon 3 content from me, and let's get started. First up, the Splat Bomb. The main thing to keep in mind is the bomb's detonation time depends on how long it was on the ground. So if you want it to explode later, throw it high, and if you want it to explode fast, roll it low. This is especially useful if you're trying to drop the bomb over a ledge and give the opponents less time to react. Against Splat Bomb, keep in mind it's one of the best get-off-me tools in the game, and if you're diving, say, a junior player, they'll often throw it at their feet, so don't commit too hard, especially if you're using a slow weapon like a blaster where jumping can get you killed. Suction Bomb is a neat trick that's been around for a while, which is that as long as a little bit of that suction bomb is peeking over a ledge, the explosion will still go through, so rather than telegraphing the entire bomb, try to hide most of it behind something like a wall and catch people off guard. The main thing to keep in mind against Suction Bomb is how long it takes to explode. That's your time to pick what you want to do before you have to get out of the area. Do you want to try to swim ahead of it? You can do it if you move fast, but if you hesitate, it might be a problem. Whatever decision you want to make, you want to try to make it quickly so it doesn't displace you for too much. My main tip for Burst Bomb users is to not just use Burst Bomb for yourself. Yes, it's an amazing combo, painting, whatever tool, but the main thing that makes Burst Bomb so good is how fast and quick it is to be able to deal reliable damage, and that's especially helpful to any teammate in a fight. See a blaster going for a target? Just throw a Burst Bomb at them. Easy damage for them to combo off of and paints over them so it makes them have a harder time dodging. This sub is way better once you start getting your teammates involved. Burst Bombs can be quite tricky to deal with. Painting your feet when you get one thrown at you to be able to move quickly is definitely important, but for slower weapons it's especially important to keep track of the ink tank of Burst Bomb users and making sure they can't throw too many of them at you when you're approaching. Auto Bombs need to be used more often. It's a nice location effect to check for enemies that can also paint and do damage, and on top of that it's only 55% of your ink tank, the cheapest of the lethal bombs, so you can throw them quite easily and often for pretty much every weapon that has them. Against Auto Bomb, keep in mind you can always detonate the bomb early by going near it. Once you're close enough, it'll stop moving and start exploding, and that can get rid of it instead of having to deal with the bomb walking toward you for like 3 seconds when you're worried about getting rushed. Fizzy Bomb is the ultimate tool of versatility. It's cheap, can be charged up for extra damage and lingering hitboxes, can be used quickly for a paint trail. You want to be able to use all of these situations. Don't just charge and throw the bomb randomly all the time. Sometimes you want to use it for other options. Against Fizzy Bomb, even though good users are able to charge it fairly quickly, it does still require a little bit to get the sub-weapon off, and then it has to travel a bit before it explodes. So it's not really that great at stopping someone who's already on top of them. I like torpedoes, so you get 3 tips for this one. Number 1, throw this at slower weapons or charging weapons. Things like blasters or chargers will have a lot harder of a time shooting it down. Number 2, try to throw this closer to the sides or behind people than directly in front of them. It requires more effort and more camera turning to be able to shoot it down. Number 3, actually use the roll or bounce mode. This prevents it from locking on targets, but it can go very far and is basically a giant burst bomb with a massive 35 damage radius that is great for comboing. Seriously, I had way too much fun with torpedo combos at the second half of Splatoon 2. Bring back Kensa Rapid. Against torpedo, if you are a slow weapon I mentioned previously, play near something with a high fire rate, and if you're a high fire rate weapon, shoot down torpedoes for your teammates. I swear they will be eternally grateful. Last of our bomb sub-weapons is the bomb that's more like a utility sub, the curling bomb. Keep in mind that this is basically a mind game tool. You throw it and people have to worry on if you're going to follow the path or not, and it's great for mobility options and keeping people worried about where you might go, especially for stuff like Sploosh and Roller with very little range. Mastering how to throw this bomb in threatening positions and know when to follow it is exceptionally important. Against curling bomb, keep in mind it doesn't really do too much. The bump damage is only 20, the explosion is tiny, and if they charge it for the better radius, they're going to be sitting there for a while and extremely vulnerable. Do not be afraid of it like it's an actual bomb. The key mistake I see with ink mine users is putting them too far back to cover flanks, but putting it in spots that are so far away that sometimes people never walk into them. You want to place it in spots where the enemy will actually walk into so they can get tagged and located before they get really close to the flank. Against ink mine, if it starts to go off, keep in mind you can parry it. It won't stop the location effect, but it will prevent all damage. My advice for Toxic Mist is to actually not use it too much. Because the sub doesn't paint or do damage, a lot of times it's not worth the ink cost. If you're throwing it, it needs to be to a point where the effect the mist is going to provide is going to be worth that ink cost. Just throwing it somewhere random you think someone might walk into only for them to completely ignore it is not worth it. Against Toxic Mist, it's mostly knowing your ink tank. The better you are at ink management, the more ink you'll have to be able to fight in Toxic Mist before having to move. And it's also worth keeping in mind Squid Roll is incredibly effective against this sub. Point sensor is incredibly basic, so all you really need to do is throw it in key choke points or under ledges. These are all common sharking spots or areas where you'll find multiple people, giving the sub a bit more value. Against point sensor, most weapons don't actually mind being located that much and can just play a little bit differently to be fine, especially mid to long range stuff where their location will be more telegraphed anyway. But if you're something like a frontline weapon and you get located, if you can't flank as much, make sure you're not just waiting for it to end. Do other productive things like painting or poking bombs. Splash wall users, learn how to jump off and throw wall on tower so it lands on it reliably. It is a classic skill from day one of Splatoon 1, and it is still incredibly valuable for that mode. You're basically just jumping backward, and the wall will travel at a very similar speed to how you jump back, and that'll allow you to get it on there. You can also learn common bounce spots to be able to get the wall on tower without having to get off it for a little bit. Against Splash Wall, if you are an ink-efficient weapon with a bomb or a mid to long range weapon that does damage, you are responsible for breaking it. Create as many 2v1 situations against wall weapons, especially 52, as possible. For using Sprinkler, keep in mind it has a decent sized hitbox and a little bit of HP, so it can be used to tank damage a little bit if you throw it on your feet or near a wall you're shooting at, and that'll also paint the area around you to make it easier for you to move. Against Sprinkler, if it's in an irrelevant location, sometimes you can just leave it. It's not worth going for a Sprinkler in a very random spot when it's gonna barely paint after a bit of time anyway, and it's only gonna take more time from you doing more valuable things. For Squid Beacons, please put them spread out along the map. The closer they are together to each other, the easier it is for enemies to take care of it. Part of the big strength with this sub-weapon comes with the ability to spread them out at a large distance and make the enemies have to spend a lot of time getting rid of all of them. Against Squid Beacon, this might only apply at higher ranks, but Beacon's location effect that it can use to reveal you when you're near it is really valuable. So if you're going against a Beacon user, they might often be checking their map to see if people are near the beacon, so try to break it at a safer distance if possible. Finally is Line Marker or Angle Shooter, one of the hardest and most undertuned sub-weapons in the entire entire game. The main thing you can do to get more consistent value out of it is throw it along the floor so the tripwire covers as much area near people as possible to increase the chance of locating them. And outside of that, I would say actually don't go for the combos much, unless if you're a bucket user, it doesn't really save that much time. Against Line Marker, keep in mind the damage it does isn't actually that bad, so unless if it's a weapon that specifically combos with the 30 damage, you don't have to be too worried about getting tagged by it if they do manage to get a straight hit on you. And if you're running away, you'll often heal enough to prevent people from comboing you if you do it fast enough. Splatoon 3 has weapons. No, but seriously, this game actually has so many weapons that it could be difficult to really get used to all of them. So in this video, I'm going to give you a tip for every single weapon in the game, and in a future one, I'll cover a tip against every single weapon in the game. I'm a pro player who's won an NA championship before and competed at top level for many years, so I hope these tips can help you improve at the game. Let's get into it, and subscribe if you enjoy. Sploosh, do not always run in with your curling bomb. I see people do this every time they throw one, and if you do that, it's going to be picked up on a lot. If you push forward with it even a little bit, enemies have to watch your curling bomb to see if you follow it, but if you always follow it, they're always going to catch you. Sometimes just poke it and stay back. Junior, use your bomb, like, all the time. Junior has a larger ink tank than every other weapon with an extra 10% and is easily the most ink efficient main weapon in the game. This means you can throw spot bombs with almost no penalty that can help you in spacing, poking, painting, fight, special output, you name it, so use it all the time you can. Arrow spray. With Fizzy Bomb, it is essential to helping you get higher special outputs, which is basically the reason you play this weapon. If you're painting up close, use the arrow spray. If you have nowhere safe to paint near you, use the full charge Fizzy Bomb. I tend to just flick my left stick left to right as fast as possible to get the charge off quickly. The jumping can also help. Splash. You have perfect jump accuracy and a bit better mobility than other shooters. Use it. Most weapons here don't actually want to jump or squid roll that much in the shooter category and more remain grounded. You are the exception. If you need to reach someone, don't be afraid to jump. You want to use that as much as possible. 52. Do not always open with your wall. Wall makes you very predictable and basically traps you in place since you can't walk ahead of it without just getting bombed, especially at higher ranks. Instead, if you're playing stealthily, you could do an option where you play to shark, get a kill, and then immediately throw your wall afterward. This will give you a pick, and then the wall can be used to keep yourself alive, allowing your team to react and play off the 4v3 while you're protected. Spotter shot players, do not treat your weapon as a pure slayer. You have a suction bomb that paints well and a very fast to charge Inkzuka. This is useful for getting you back in especially, so play for your special sometimes. Alright, so this tip mostly applies to Zap players from Splatoon 2, where you are really passive with the weapon, and while you still want to play for your special a lot, when you have that tacticooler, do not just throw it at the back of the map and stay there painting. It's an aggressive special and one you want to use to go in with your team. The jump accuracy and run speed are especially helpful for your weapon, so you should be turning on the Slayer mode most of the time you're using that special. Splattershot Pro players, use a little bit of Intensify Action. You're one of the few weapons that has very good grounded RNG, and thus Intensify Action is stronger for you than it is on other weapons. And for weapons that are not blasters, you barely need any to majorly reduce that jump RNG. So get used to running it. Jumping is one of the few tools to help your weapon actually stand out. You want to get used to it. 96 players, use your Sprinkler as a mini meat shield. It can actually tank a little bit of damage, and it paints around you, which can be useful. If you're up close and have the ink for it, use it by your feet to protect yourself. Jet Squelcher players, do not pop vacuum every time you full charge the special. I see this a lot, and it mostly comes from Splatoon 2 having a terribly designed special that even at top level Jet Squelchers would simply try to spam as many of as possible. Those days are over though. Vacuum is a very coordination dependent special, and the best way to get value out of it is to use it with a teammate who can take advantage of the fact that you're basically making them invincible. Do not just pop it every time you get it, think about the proper timing to use it. For L3, this is going to sound similar to Pro, but get used to Intensify Action up. In this case, you have perfect RNG when grounded, so if you run a good bit of Intensify, you'll have near perfect in the air, which is very useful for this weapon. For H3 players, I would highly recommend practicing your squid rolls and especially shooting out of it. With your perfect accuracy, you have good access to them, and as one of the slower weapons in the game, it's very important to get as much mileage out of them as possible. Squeezer players, do not forget your painting mode exists. Obviously, your normal shooting mode is very good and pokes people at a distance well, but sometimes it's better to play for your special, and I see many Squeezer players who don't struggle with mashing forget that the painting mode even exists. Carbon rollers, do not rely on your horizontal flick. It is only good if you are literally right next to the opponent. While they are much harder, vertical flicks give you a bit more range, are much more reliable, and can two-shot more easily, so it's much better to get used to using those as your primary form of attack. For normal rollers, the main thing I would say is remember to use your Big Bubbler for your team sometimes. It's easy to get locked into the aggressive style and only use Big Bubblers selfishly since Curling Bomb gives you such good mobility into the enemy base, but this can also be used to rotate to your teammates and protect them, which is something the special is really good at, so don't be afraid to do both. Dynamo players also really need to master Squid Roll, but in particular yours is a bit harder. In order to do a horizontal flick out of a Squid Roll, you need to input the shoot button right as you do the squid roll input. This is the only way to get the horizontal flick, which is significantly better. Dynamo's one-hit kills do not have as much range as it seems like it does, and so being able to leap forward not only keeps you evasive, but allows you to close the gap and effectively give you a little bit more distance. I hate saying this because this playstyle is lame, but Flings' painting on its vertical flick is one of the best tools in the game as it goes incredibly far, is quite ink efficient, and you have decent mobility during it. You also have Missiles, which is basically a free way to get recon on every enemy player and let your team in. So oftentimes, rather than being aggressive, you're going to be wanting to play for the special and using that to let you and your teammates in. Swiffers are the only charge weapon in the game to charge full speed in the air, so be sure to take advantage of this by using jump shots under ledges to cover yourself and be able to hit spots that normal chargers can't. GoTuber players, be sure to take advantage of your main special gimmick. No, not that one. The tap shots. They go super far, which is great for painting range, and can even help assist your teammates in fights. And as a bonus, it even combos well with a rolled torpedo if you hit the direct hit. As for Bamboo, you really want to be aware of what your teammates are doing. If they're in a fight, you can probably one-tap the opponent. Do they have a burst bomb they're poking at someone? You want to take advantage of that. Any form of chip damage is very valuable for you. Be aware of it. For normal charger, don't worry about your aim as much. Try to think more about where you're standing. You want to be in spots where you can pressure people even if you don't hit the shots, and it's especially important when you're close to your special because you want to be vacuuming for your teammates, not just panicking on snipe and then getting ignored. E-liter players, do not forget to set up your mines. With the combination of those plus Wavebreaker, you are actually really difficult to rush down, but if you don't have your mine set up beforehand, you're not going to be able to defend yourself as easily. Slosher is a very basic one, but get used to how to actually flick your sloshes. They're very useful for close range combat or for hitting people at specific angles. Tri-slosher players, you might not know this, but the middle slosh has more range than the outside ones. In fact, it can even outrange some short range shooters, especially if you have a little bit of high ground. Sloshing Machine does not kill as quickly as you think. Even with direct hits, any up-close melee weapon will probably trade you out at worst if they're up close to you. As such, you want to take a note out of the Blaster's book and try to keep your effective range against any short-range weapons, meaning they're at a distance and you can just strafe backward, taking advantage of your speed to keep them at a distance. For Explo players, this is going to be a bit of an advanced tip that's going to take a while to get used to, but any hit of your main weapon will reveal the opponent on the map. So if you're trying to hit someone over an angle, which will be quite common, you can flare open the map to check their location and try to follow them, or at least be aware of where they are. Blob players, you want to try to find spots where the blobs can actually bounce and stay in an area for longer. This weapon is insanely good at walling out locations with how slow the shots travel, but if they're going to go right off a cliff wherever you're sloshing it, you're not really taking advantage of the main weapon very much. For mini players, take advantage of jumping more while you're firing. This weapon actually has really good jump height compared to the other Splatlings, so it's quite useful for that situation. Heavy is going to be my generic tip for every Splatling, but there's nothing too special about this one, which is use run speed. Unlike all of them but Nautilus, please, it helps so much with your strafing speed. For Hydra, make sure to play for your Booyah Bomb if you're dealing with longer range weapons on the map. Trying to approach something like a Charger isn't going to work out too well in most situations, and your special is the best tool to get your team in, move them out of the way, and allow you to put up more presence. For ballpoint players, if you're fighting in your short range mode, the charge time is so fast that you can take advantage of swim form in between your charges a little bit to be able to get some extra mobility in your fights. For Nautilus players, remember the brand new Squid Roll and Surge does work with your charge hold, and since you have a faster and longer lasting one than normal chargers do, you can take advantage of it better than most weapons. I'm going to combine Luna and Normal Blaster with a basic tip to focus on your spacing. This is a tip for all blasters, but especially applicable to these two, which is you want to try to maintain the effective range where you can reliably hit indirects. For example, if your opponent moves to the right, you should be able to follow them. If they go toward you, you should back up to keep that effective distance. Do not just go for directs. Range Blaster has the worst ink efficiency out of all the blasters, by far, and it also has extreme whiting frames that prevent you from recovering your ink immediately. So if you're trying to use this weapon, be sure you allow yourself to recover your ink for a good amount of time. If you just try to shoot and recover a little bit for the next shot, you're going to have a ton of downtime. If you're playing Clash Blaster, keep in mind you have a large indirect radius but a slow kill time. You want to take advantage of any form of cover or teammates to help you play around that weakness, as a lot of other short range weapons like shooters will just kill you way faster if you try to play like a normal weapon. For Rapid and Rapid Pro, there's a technique called sparking that can be done for all blasters, which is shooting the ground near your opponent to get a little spark that can do minor amounts of damage. This is especially useful for the Rapid Blasters because it combos perfectly with a direct hit for a kill, so if people are up close to you, this is something reliable you can go for. Next up for the brushes. Ink Brush should keep in mind that they have permanent ink resistance whenever they roll, meaning you won't take damage from enemy ink even if you turn straight into it. Because of this and your high rolling speed, you can play behind enemy lines and be incredibly annoying, farming specials behind them or getting quick kills depending on on the mode. As for Octobrush, you are a lot slower than Inkbrush, so I'd highly recommend Squid Roll flicking or jumping when you flick to get a little bit of extra distance. That bit of mobility will allow you to chase enemies and be a lot harder to hit yourself. For Dapple Dualies, remember you can cancel the Squid Roll and Surge into your dodge rolls. It can be really useful for giving you just a little bit of extra distance or peeking over ledges, which is especially important with how little range this weapon has. For the normal Dualies, take good advantage of your standard fire. It's honestly decently strong, and not committing to the end lag a roll has can be useful in a lot of situations. It's not a weapon you want to spam them on. For the Dualie Squelchers, while it's a bit difficult, I would recommend getting used to the roll tech, which is rolling and then immediately jumping out of it while resetting the stick to neutral. This allows you to jump with some of the accuracy from the Squid Roll itself and makes you really mobile and hard to hit. For Glugas, this is applicable to all Dualies, but especially helpful here with how slow they are. Remember, you can throw sub-weapons in between your dodge rolls, so if you roll, you can then throw your wall and then use your second roll and appear right behind it for a good amount of cover. For Tetra Dualies, do not spam all 4 rolls at once. You have some of the highest end lag in the game, so sometimes using just 2 or 3 of them, if there are enough, are good so you can use the second 2 rolls to quickly move when the opponent reacts. For the normal umbrella, do not launch your shield all the time. It takes forever to come back and your weapon is horrible at fighting without it. Remember, if your shield is up, you can just swim out of it for some mobility or shoot when you have an opening to refresh that timer. 10 umbrella players do the opposite. This one's more obvious because the shield launches incredibly fast on that weapon, it comes back really fast, and the shield gets extra resistance when it's launched. This is incredibly useful for taking space for you or your teammates with how powerful that shield is. Lastly, for the umbrellas with undercover, be sure to flare your shield rather than constantly holding it up. Whenever your shield is down, it regenerates HP immediately, so if you're able to drop it while one of your shots goes off and then pull it back up, it'll regen some of its health and tank for longer. This is incredibly useful because undercover umbrella does not have a lot of HP, so every little bit extra you can get counts. There's a lot I could say about the Tri-Stringer, but probably one important thing to note is you can paint better by looking up and down when you shoot, and that's really important to know because without that, it's some of the worst paint in the game. Reflux, it obviously paints really well, but it can also kill pretty quickly. It's important to note that horizontal shots are better if you need reliable damage, while one-hit kills are better if you need to kill someone who's not weak at all. And finally, there's the Splatanas. For the normal Splatana, do not treat this like a brush. Its kill time is much slower, and the attacks have good range and mobility, so it's important you actually play your range and damage people first before going up close. And last of all, for the Splatana Stamper, don't over-rely on your burst combo. Yes, a charge slash to a burst bomb is a very reliable combo, but a normal slash will also combo with it and uses much less of your ink. Make sure you're using the burst bomb at the right time so you're not spending as much time recovering your ink. Sploosh has extremely little range and relies on getting in. If you're able to check their curling bombs or common flank routes, they can struggle to close the gap against you, and strafing backward while you're fighting them can help you maintain your range. A big part of countering Junior is being aware of where they are and preventing them from setting up their big bubbler in important spots. If you can deny them from dropping in, they'll have to use it really far back, and it won't help out their team. For Aerospray, even with its fast fire rate, it's actually a really slow kill time compared to other things of its range, so it's a weapon that you can definitely take out in more head-on engagements. Against Splash, keep in mind that it actually has slightly less range than stuff like the Splatter Shot 52 and N-Zap, so it can be outranged similar to the other shorter range weapons on this list. For Splatter Shot, it, with a lot of other shooters, has RNG that increases the longer it fires, so if they're not swimming around and just shooting around normally, you can wait for a little bit and their RNG will be getting worse, meaning they are less likely to kill you quickly. Against 52, keep in mind this wall is an integral part of its kit, as setting it up allows it to control a lot of space. Similar to Junior's Big Bubble, you can deny it space so the wall can't go very far, but also keep in mind you could bomb the sides of it to kill them if they're on the wrong side. The main thing to get used to when fighting N-Zap is its high strafe speed, especially when it has Tacticooler active. Getting used to how it moves is a big part of killing it, so you want to lead your shots a bit further ahead of where it's going than you would versus most weapons. While Splattershot Pro has solid accuracy, keep in mind that the paint and ink efficiency for this weapon are actually rather low, so if you're in an engagement where you're trying to hold a zone, you can often just outpaint them and push up when they run out of ink. 96 cal is probably the least mobile of all the shooters. It has a very slow fire rate and some of the worst jump RNG in the game, so it has to be very stationary. Using bombs or long distance shots to paint over it can make it a lot harder for that weapon to fight. Jet Squelcher can really struggle at dealing with people with specific angles. Since its kill time is so slow, it can't afford to get up close and contest them directly, so playing under any form of ledge is really difficult for this weapon to deal with, and its kit does not help it with that. For L3, its shots are more committal than it looks. There's a good bit of end lag between shooting and going back into squid form again, and unlike other semi-automatics, L3 does have a good bit of jump RNG, so it's more exploitable when it fires if you want to punish it up close. For H3, the weapon actually has some of the worst object damage in the game, so if you have a weapon with something like a Big Bubbler Shield, Crab Tank, or any other another HP special, it's really good at forcing this weapon out of locations. For Squeezer, the weapon is really ink hungry, and it has a wall that has a lot of whiting frames where you can't recover your ink tank. Based on how you engage it, it could run out of ink putting down a wall and trying to fight you. So just stalling a little bit could be enough to put it in a bad situation. Roller and Carbon are two weapons that are about getting in as efficiently and sneakily as possible, and the counterplay involves being good at tracking where they are at all times so you can know where to move. Look for things like a roller following its curling bomb, or paint under a ledge a Carbon would like to shark under, and you could be much more aware of where these players might be and be able to paint over them to force them to move away. Dynamo Roller's flicks are so slow and predictable that you can honestly parry it and then shoot them afterward. As long as you're not weak, you won't die from it, and it's really simple and reliable once you get the timing down. Just look for right before they're about to flick and then roll to the side slightly toward them. When you're fighting a Flingza Roller, keep in mind its mobility is actually pretty low, since none of its kit helps it with that, and the vertical flick is really bad at it. So if you maintain decent enough distance to be outside of the horizontal flick range, you can trap it pretty easily by painting over it. Squiffer is usually a great test on if you're good at tracking jumping opponents, because Squiffer has no charge penalty in the air, and it's basically its main movement option. While GooTuber has a long charge hold, people underestimate just how long it takes to actually charge the weapon up. Because of that, paired with its range, don't be afraid to just run at it once it misses a shot. Against Bamboo, this weapon actually has a horrible time painting its feet, so if you have something like a burst bomb or mid-range weapon, shooting over it can make it quite uncomfortable for it to fight you. Against Charger and E-Liter, it's all about knowing where they control and trying to play around it. For example, if Charger is on the top left grades of Inkblot, they can't really hit the right side of the map at all, so taking a fight over there can allow you to be in a 4v3 situation. Outside of that, it's really about trying to play near cover, where the laser can't have much of an impact. If the Charger's not able to put pressure and hit clear shots, then your team has a huge advantage in their fights due to having basically an extra player. For the normal Slosher, this weapon struggles to take fights primarily in the open, but don't get too close to it to where it can flick its shots to hit you reliably. That kind of mid-shooter range is the best place to play against it, and keep in mind that it really struggles when it can take advantage of its angles. Tri-Slosher is very similar to Squiffer in the sense of it will be jumping a lot as its main movement option, and learning to predict and read that will allow you to get quick kills. Outside of that though, do not underestimate this weapon's range. It is surprisingly far. Sloshing Machine does not actually have that good a kill time. It's really bad even if it hits direct, so if you play a weapon that can get close to them, trying to shark in without taking any form of damage is your best bet. It also gets very easily overwhelmed in 2v1 situations, so help out a teammate if they're trying to take that fight. Explosher is surprisingly susceptible to sharking or sneaky players, since it doesn't paint that well outside of the explosion itself and cannot kill you in one hit. As for Blob, and this applies to Explosher as well, they cannot hit anything very well on grading. It's an insane advantage on maps like Mincemeat. You want to take advantage of it when dueling this weapon. For mini Spotling, while it's charging, it actually has better jump height than other Spotlings, so if you're going against the weapon, be aware it's going to be able to do some maneuvers that other Spotlings can't. For Heavy Spotling, be aware that partial charges still have very good range and can be useful for defending yourself. Don't underestimate Spotlings using them. Against Hydra Spotling, this is one of the most powerful weapons in the game, but it also takes forever to even charge, so any amount of displacement being bombs or specials are huge against it. For Ballpoint Spotling, its short range mode, while fast, has a lot less range than most people realize. It's very similar to Splash in the sense that it can be outranged quite easily in fights. Nautilus has really low bullets on a full charge, and oftentimes they're going to recharge the weapon fully if they don't see you, making sharking effective against this weapon, especially since its paint isn't amazing. Blasters are all very similar, so for this class I'm going to do 3 general tips and then 1 specific tip for Clash. First up, these weapons do not provide good paint or special output. This means they must apply pressure or get picks to have an impact on the game. If they're playing very passively, often they can just be ignored. Number 2, all of these weapons have an effective range where they can hit indirect blasts, but are susceptible both too close and too far away. Yes, even Luna Blaster has a blind spot near it. Your goal when fighting this weapon is to get outside of its effective range, whether too close or too far, depending on your situation. And finally, all of these weapons, even the Rapids, are somewhat slow, and are susceptible to things like splat bombs or painting its feet that can hinder its movement. And finally, for Clash specifically, this weapon is one of the worst kill times in the game, but a larger indirect radius. If the worst possible situation happens and you're stuck fighting this thing, it's better to go for a kill than to try to move out of the way. Inkbrush's only major weakness is their lack of range, and they have good mobility to make up for that. Do not underestimate how quickly they can move through even your own ink, and be ready to constantly swim and move around them to maintain effective range or play near teammates to get help. Octobrush has to shark in more with its slower movement and kill time, so being aware of where it is at all times is incredibly important for dealing with that weapon. Against Apple Dualies, it's mostly about keeping your range. Because this weapon is beacon and in Tacticooler, it has literally nothing it can do to affect you at any form of distance. It's all about getting close, so being aware of where it is the most important tool. For Dooley, it's mostly waiting out the 2 rolls to get a really good punish on their end lag, and if they use standard fire mode, you can outduel them quite easily since that actually has pretty weak damage. Dooley Squelchers are mostly about getting in up close. Fighting them at a mid-range can be really difficult because their rolls are much faster at spacing you, and they can do reliable damage at that range. However, their kill time is pretty slow, so if you can manage to get up close to them to the point where they can't dodge roll away, you can kill them quite easily. Luga Doolies are very reliant on getting set up and especially playing around their wall. Any form of bomb weapon can be exceptionally good, and any amount of forcing them to move can be useful. But on top of that, keep in mind the weapon doesn't paint a lot, so if it's not an irrelevant area, like with blasters, they can very easily be ignored. Tetradoolies have a really important trait, which is that they can shoot while they're rolling. It's very crucial to keep this in mind when trying to fight the weapon because good Tetras can track you while they're rolling. Being able to fight them after their rolls are over is the main way to kill them. That end lag is the major weakness of this weapon. Regular Umbrella is some of the worst ink efficiency in the game, so taking fights slow is often better as long as you're able to, and especially if you see it throw a sub-weapon, be ready for it to run out of ink and then punish it. Umbrella does actually have a small window after the shield is launched before it gets another one, and that's the best time to attack it. But if you are going to go for a launch 10 shield, use some form of specials, bombs, and or teammates, as taking it down by yourself is often not possible. Undercover Umbrella takes so long to even kill one person that any form of 2v1 absolutely destroys the weapon since it basically makes its shield near useless and the weapon takes way too long to kill both players. Against Bow, it's just most important to take fights when you're not low, as if you are, they can use the level 1 charge to spam explosives that are very difficult for you to avoid, so don't just rush it like a charger. For the Reflux, this thing's mainly good at spamming special. Anytime you get the opportunity to fight or poke it back is useful, because it doesn't actually paint from very far away, so if you're able to keep it back, it can't spam specials as much and won't have as much of an impact. Splatana Wiper is mostly getting used to their strafe speed and being able to punish it. Keep in mind it's the highest in the game, but it also can't be influenced by run speed at all, so once you get used to how fast it moves, it is very reliable regardless of the gear set they're running. For Stamper, be careful dealing with this weapon under ledges. While it is a little bit vulnerable up close, it can get really nice charge slashes while staying in a little bit of cover, so respect the weapon when it's in that location. So since scripting this, a new update dropped, and I'm going to cover the 3 brand new weapons with a tip both for and against them, since I didn't cover them in my previous video with them, not existing. For Big Swig Roller, use the wall behind or to the side of your ink vacuum to cover one of the vulnerability points while you shoot at the zone, and it'll also give you somewhere to retreat to if the enemies fill up your vacuum fast. Against Big Swig, keep in mind that its damage is incredibly weak, and it has to depend heavily on its vertical flick, which will limit its movement. Try to get close, but not close enough to be one shot, and just absolutely mow it down. For Nova Shot, keep in mind that attacking with Killer Whale up is super important, as even a tiny bit of damage from the whale makes you a 4-shot. It's super good synergy, and with the paint of the weapon, there is no reason not to get a lot of the special. Against Nova, this is a weapon you want to really get used to its strafe speed, as it's actually quite fast, especially with run speed. Think of it a lot like NZAP, where if you get used to it, it's a bit easier to deal with, especially since the kill time on this thing mixed with the RNG is actually pretty bad. For Sniper Rider 5H, if you're using some of your shots and run out of places to hit, don't waste the rest of them. You'll actually get the ink refunded for any shots you don't use when you go back into squid form, which is really useful with how ink hungry this weapon is. Against Sniper Rider, keep in mind while it can strafe, in order to keep its charges, it cannot go into squid form in any way, shape, or form. Any form of terrain that would make it awkward for them to hit you while walking is really useful against this weapon.
A while back, I did one tip for and against every Splatoon 3 weapon, but now with content done, there's a lot of new weapons to talk about. Technically, I did the first 3 last time, but they were a bit new. I think we could do better than that. Same for Splatanas and Stringers. So this is going to be one tip for and against every brand new Splatoon 3 weapon. Let's get started. For using Splatana Wiper, the charge slash should be used a lot more for mobility when stalling against opponents. Not only does it have a bit more range, but the dash can mix up your movement a little bit more, which helps more than just strafing around and is a very underrated aspect of the weapon. When going against Wiper, keep in mind that its kill time is very weak if it's not able to get up close to you. This means this weapon is often playing the sides of the map looking for 1v1s, and you need to be cautious of what kind of angles it's going to take and keep track of its position. Think of it like a longer ink brush. It plays very similarly. For Splatana Stamper, especially after all the nerfs, the horizontal slash is the main one you want to use. It has a lower ink consumption, is pretty fast, and still covers a lot of range. It's incredibly underutilized. If you're going against Splatana Stamper, keep in mind cover can very easily cut off slashes, and try to use that to keep fights with the weapon in mid-range. You don't want to be too close to it where its charge slash can kill you, but not too far away where it can easily space you out. The number one mistake I see people using Decapitator for is only using the dash slash to dash at people. The dash is a great movement option, and the slash that comes out of it has the range of the 96 cal. It's a lot, so you can use it while moving sideways or retreating to try to use more of the damage combos rather than just exclusively going in to charge slash one shot. It will make you a lot less predictable of a target. Against Decapitator, verticality is the most built-in weakness I've ever seen in a weapon. Everything this thing wants to do is awkward with it. Even a small amount of high ground makes it more awkward for Decapitator. Now, when it comes to bows, I'm still not the most knowledgeable about them, so I figured I'd bring in someone who is.
Hello, I'm Erito, the best bow player in North America. Today I'll be discussing how to effectively use bows and how to counter them. While each bow shares similar strengths and challenges, I'll first focus on general tips that apply to all of them. The two main things you need to master are 1. Understanding angles, knowing how much to charge your shot and how high to aim for a direct hit. 2. Predicting your opponent's movements. This is key for landing direct shots and limiting their mobility, ensuring you can maintain control of key areas. The original bow excels by positioning yourself effectively to land direct hits while dealing damage at long range. It's also great for contesting other long range weapons like ballpoint and explosion. As for reflex, its main function is to control the map, allowing your slayers more opportunities to move and secure kills. It also sets up openings since both specials do exactly that. When it comes to well string, the goal is to apply constant pressure while coordinating with your teammates. This synergy can help combo your damage with theirs, making it easier to secure kills. By mastering these techniques, you'll be able to maximize the potential of your bow and play more effectively. To counter bows, it's effective to use weapons that pressure them by pushing forward, forcing them out of positions and limiting their ability to contribute to fights. Weapons like Tetra, Decaf, Rollers, and Wipers are particularly good at this due to their mobility and role in aggressive play. Additionally, Chargers pose a tough matchup for bows, as their larger hitbox and superior ledge peeking capabilities give them an advantage in long-range duels. These are the methods to improve your bow and matchup against bows. If you'd like to learn more about bows, I have a YouTube and Twitch channel dedicated exclusively to bow content. You can find the links in the description. Thank you, Chara, for having me.
Thanks for coming on. You can check out his bow guide in the description, by the way, if you want to learn more about Tri-Stringer. Anyway, let's get to the next weapon, the Big Swig Roller. If you're investing in a Big Swig and you really want to get better at it, the vertical flick is what you gotta learn. This is basically a better splat roller flick, but it has a much more narrow and unforgiving hitbox. You gotta get used to using it for fighting and ledge camp positions. The good news is, people are not going to expect a Big Swig who actually knows how to abuse its vertical flick with the reputation the weapon has, so you'll catch some people off guard. If you're going against this weapon, its main strength is the sheer amount of paint output it has, but it very much struggles in fights, so you should be baiting it into overextending or looking for times you can rush the weapon down if it ever is playing by itself. However, keep in mind that this is going to be easier the flatter the terrain is, as any kind of roller angle under a ledge is going to give it a lot more to work with. For Splattershot Nova, the damage on this weapon is so terrible that you need to be either using your kit, minus the point sensors because those don't do damage, or playing around teammates to help you out. If your main gun is the only thing doing damage to the enemy, your fights are going to be incredibly difficult, or you're just not going to be taking enough of them. If you're going against Splattershot Nova, this is yet again another weapon that needs to be fought a lot more, and like with Big Swig, you should look for points where it's isolated from its team. This weapon does have a decent strafe speed and mobility, though, being a shooter, so you'll have to get a bit closer to ambush it or take advantage of some form of terrain option, which is going to make them have a lot harder of a time fighting. For Pencil, this is the one time where I think the tip I gave last time was pretty relevant, which is if you don't use all of your shots, just go back into squid form to get the ink tank back. But for a small bonus, Pencil has an unrestricted jump height at all times, so you can use this to climb up small blocks while charging up the weapon. If you're going against Pencil though, be really careful using special resources or even looking at Pen in big team fights. Oftentimes this weapon is going to be very far away and very mobile, with teammates ready to clean kills since it's running 3 Slayers with it pretty much at all times. Target the weapon when it's overextended or when its teammates are down. Otherwise, it's usually not the best target to go for, and there's a much better choice closer to you. For S-Blast, use your Burst Bomb or even Sprinkler for mobility a lot more than trying to use it for damage. It might seem useful, especially if you're going for the short range mode, but this weapon is slow and the damage combos are not consistent in the slightest. So oftentimes it's much better to use them to keep yourself mobile enough to get 2 shots off. If you're going against the weapon, it doesn't have any form of long-range AoE. Treat it like a weird mid-range charger that turns into a slow Luna Blaster, which means if you're up close to it or around corners, respect it, but at a distance you can easily outpoke it with other similar range weapons. When using Paintbrush, it's all about trying to make up for the weapon's mobility. Use jumps when possible to gain more distance when going for opponents, or try to shark a bit closer before popping out on enemies. Even though you have a lot of range, your mobility is horrible and you're basically stuck swinging or have to go through the windup all over again, so you want to be able to pop up and take opponents down in one shot. If you're going against the weapon, most of beating it is just running away from it when it initially attacks you. That startup is going to give you a little bit of an opening to get away from it, but stay aware from where it is and prioritize your own movement first. Once you get out of its initial kill range, the weapon has no options that aren't extremely predictable to continue the fight. You'll have a lot easier of a job punishing its lag. When using Dreadringer, you really want to play around getting the initial damage on targets, especially because if you get up close, hitting 2 sloshes is really difficult, and that might not even one-shot. So having to hit only 2 sloshes to secure a kill is really important. Play your spacing right and look for either teammates to do damage or for someone to get greedy against you. If you're going against Dreadringer, you want to start your engagements up close or go for the first hit yourself. If you're weak even a little bit, Dreadringer becomes a very strong fighter, but its low mobility paired with a high accuracy requirement to hit 2 separate shots up close when it's flicking is going to make it much more difficult to secure quick kills against you if you get the jump on them. When using edit spiraling, you need to be more aggressive with your Tacticooler. This is not a backline, this is a weird mini-knot hybrid. You should be fighting with Cooler and taking advantage of your main weapon's quick strafe speed and kill time. When you're going against it, the long charge time though will give you good options to poke it and try to force it to use its charge. You do not want to let edit get a full charge, it will paint the entire map and kill you really quickly. So don't challenge it when it's fully charged, try to wait that out and push it when it doesn't have one ready, or use certain subs and specials that can force it to get rid of its charge earlier. If you're using Dowser Dually, the most important thing to keep in mind is to not burn your dodge roll. The lag on this weapon is horrible after you use it, so take advantage much more of your main weapon's decent mobility plus burst bomb, and use dodge roll as an escape option or to secure a kill. This can still be really useful for a fast kill time or paint output, but you can't use it anywhere near as much as other dualies, so the timing is really important. If you're going against the weapon, Dowser doesn't actually paint that well for its distance, so you don't have to worry about it as much passively. Baiting the rollout of the weapon is always a good idea, but for the most part, taking fights with the weapon is a lot easier than it seems. Just make sure you're not getting chipped by burst bomb. Try to look for if it's used those already, because that's the main way it's going to speed up its kill time. Finally, for Recycle Umbrella, if you're using the weapon, really the only way your shield's going to come in that much handy is to use the 2 shields at the same time. So go in with a launched one and try to have it so your next shield will regen by the time that one's getting shot. Just in general, getting any value out of your shield is pretty tricky with this weapon. Keep in mind it can still block certain specials. It might have 100 HP, but that's enough for one Trizuka bullet. If you're going against the weapon, you have to respect it on one-on-one fights. Even if the shield is a little bit weak, the main weapon can kill you really quickly, so it's going to look for a lot of isolated fights, and you don't want to give it one-on-ones, just like any other Umbrella. But that being said, that's my advice for and against all of the new weapons. Let me know what you think and anything I missed in the comments below, and I'll see you all next time.